I don't understand why this is happening.
Because you didn't read the bylaws before buying.
This isn't yours anymore. That's what she yelled the instant my boots touched the porch of my family's cabin after years away. Like I was some trespasser on the land I grew up on. Picture returning to the one place that had always kept you grounded, only to find strangers with clipboards, posted signs, and a self-appointed president claiming it was all theirs now. My heart pounded, not from fear but from the sheer ridiculousness of it. Deep down, I knew something about this didn't make sense. Tell me, what would you have done in my place? Coming back to that cabin was like opening a time capsule. I'd been gone 3 years, caring for my mother during her final illness. But I had never abandoned this place. Taxes paid, insurance up to date, and as a retired federal land inspector, I knew perfectly well what true abandonment looked like. This wasn't it. The dust on my furniture said one thing, but my paperwork told another. This land had been in my family for generations, tucked into Carter Basin, a quiet valley where I'd planned to retire. What I hadn't planned on was the spectacle in my front yard: floodlights illuminated polished wooden signs, Heritage Trail access point, neighborhood recreation gateway. On a folding table sat a miniature subdivision model, complete with toy trees and pretend hiking paths, and beside it all stood Karen Pierce. Perfect navy blazer, leather portfolio clutched like armor. I'd known her before I left town. Back then, just another neighbor, maybe overly concerned with property values. Now she carried herself with the polish of corporate training. Today we unveil the Greenway Neighborhood Enhancement Project, she declared to the small crowd gathered on my lawn. This property has been inactive for 3 years. It presents an opportunity for shared community benefit. To anyone else, it might have sounded reasonable, but I recognized the tactic. Slick language meant to make overreach sound noble. She waved toward my cabin as though it were a blight. Neglected parcels lower neighborhood values. They diminish quality of life. But through cooperative stewardship, we can transform underused land into amenities for all. Her voice carried that confident, controlling tone, half conviction, half performance. That's when I chose to answer without words. I strolled to their display, picked up the tiny boundary markers they'd placed around my land, and calmly carried them across the street to her porch. I set each one down like I was returning borrowed tools. Subtle, no, intentional. Absolutely. If she could redesignate my land as communal space, then surely she'd understand me redesignating her porch as storage. Her polished mask cracked instantly. You can't just move planning materials. She snapped, professional tone evaporating. This estate has been abandoned for 3 years. Under HOA emergency protocols, unmaintained assets fall under public improvement. Her grip on that portfolio tightened as her voice rose, and the neighbors who'd been nodding politely started shifting uneasily. That's when Riley Moore spoke up from across the street. New to the neighborhood, but I knew she was an attorney. Shows don't have eminent domain, she said calmly. You can't declare private property abandoned and seize it for public use. Abandonment is a legal process requiring court involvement, and even then, land reverts to the county, not to an association. The crowd froze. Murmurs rippled. Faces changed. The HOA president's improvement initiatives suddenly looked less like progress and more like overreach. Wait, she can't actually do that? A woman down the block asked. Riley adjusted her glasses, shifting into lawyer mode. HOA covenants grant design review powers. They cover common area upkeep. They do not authorize estate seizure. And right then, under the leaves at my feet, I felt something solid. I kicked them back and uncovered a granite marker, old, weathered, carved with symbols I recognized. Federal survey work. Not a modern lot marker, but something older, far more binding. From down the street, Louise Harper approached. 70 years old, a living archive of neighborhood history. That stone's been here since before any houses, she called out. My husband used to show it to me. Said it marked the original government survey route for the railroad through this valley. Riley crouched down, studying the engravings. Federal survey markers hold serious weight in boundary disputes, she said. If this shifts the parcel lines, then development assumptions could be invalid. Karen's face drained of color. Riley added softly, I suggest you consult legal counsel before pushing forward with any enhancement projects involving private land. That ended it. The neighbors drifted away, exchanging uneasy looks. Karen just stood there, staring at the marker like it was live ordnance. Even her estate manager, Noah Grant, urged her to pack up. "Maybe we should revisit the timeline on this," he muttered, sounding like a man suddenly aware of liability. As they dismantled their display, something in her reaction nagged at me. This wasn't just caution. This was panic, the kind of panic that comes when a secret you hoped would stay buried surfaces unexpectedly. She kept sneaking glances at that marker, her hands shaking as she packed up. Tomorrow, I told myself I'd find out exactly what that survey stone meant, and I had a feeling it would turn her development plans into a legal nightmare she hadn't anticipated. Still, watching her retreat in a haze of nerves, I couldn't help but wonder, what else had she been hiding, and how far would she go to protect the little empire she'd built on borrowed authority? The county land records office buzzed with fluorescent hum. I brought Riley as counsel, because I knew Karen wouldn't let this slide quietly. My years as a federal inspector gave me the tools to navigate the system, but having an attorney sent a message. Karen arrived with 2 boxes labeled Community Planning, Archive, and Historical Precedent Records. Noah trailed behind, visibly uneasy. She'd clearly armed herself for battle. Inside Conference Room B, James Mitchell, senior title examiner, spread her stacks of documents across the table. I laid down my deed and photos of the federal marker. Her files covered half the table. Mine fit in a single folder. She launched into her presentation like she was speaking to a board of directors. As you can see from our extensive records, the HOA has long exercised authority over property standards, recreational planning, and neighborhood development. These charts reflect consistent precedent over 15 years of collective improvements. While she gestured and organized her show of paperwork, James quietly pulled out additional files of his own. I'd seen parcel maps, deed filings, and land grant records before from my federal work. "Mr. Carter," he said, cutting her off mid-sentence, "I have something important to show you about your family's original land claim." His voice carried the kind of steady confidence that comes from facts, not presentations. James spoke in plain, direct language, slicing through the usual corporate jargon. The HOA president jumped in, holding up a stamped memo from the regional land office. She claimed the association's projects had been given conditional approval due to inactivity. James paused, unfolded a national survey map, his lips pressed tight. The Carter name stretched across the valley. The scale was overwhelming. According to federal records, my family still held mineral rights, water access, and easement approval authority for nearly 400 acres. Every home in the neighborhood sat on land where our legal rights had never been formally transferred or canceled. It felt as though I'd inherited a kingdom I never even knew existed. Her reaction was swift and defensive. She rifled through boxes, dragging out covenant declarations and planning agreements. "Our HOA protocols clearly define our collective improvement controls," she snapped. "Our Architectural Review Board has governed this community for 15 years. Our assessments pay for shared recreation." Her voice climbed with each point. Those neatly arranged files now looked like panic. James stayed quiet, eyes moving between her memo and the government map. The air felt like it was balanced on a knife's edge. Riley leaned forward, attorney instincts sharp, and narrowed her gaze at the stamped memo. "This has to be verified," she said. "If it's real, procedures change. If not, it's fraud." The mood shifted. Even James seemed unsettled. She kept her composure, drumming her fingers on the folder's edge. The uncertainty pressed on my chest like weight. For the first time, the ground felt unstable beneath me. She looked almost triumphant, and suddenly the neighbor's $40,000 investment felt like a threat hanging overhead. Noah scribbled notes, muttering about financial exposure, but she silenced him with a glance. After reviewing both sets of files, James spoke quietly. "This needs further confirmation," he said. "Multiple jurisdictions may be involved." She gave a faint, steady smile. I watched her leave with her documents intact, wondering if she'd make the next move. No victory yet, only a storm gathering. As she prepared to exit, she added one last remark. "This valley's identity has always been collective," she said. "We built everything around that idea." Then she walked out, head held high. I couldn't tell if it was confidence or something more dangerous. Sitting there in the aftermath, a heavy weight settled over me. This wasn't about defending my cabin anymore. Suddenly, I was responsible for an entire ecosystem, shielding a neighborhood from someone who had been stretching statutory power for more than a decade. James outlined the next steps with calm precision. I'll prepare certified copies of the National Land Grant records and updated boundary surveys, he said. That will set the legal framework for future planning talks. But Mr. Carter, people who've invested time and money don't always respect jurisdictional limits when their plans unravel. As she left clutching her boxes, I realized this was just the beginning. Her next move would be personal, not bureaucratic. Though the HOA president had been thoroughly blocked at the county office, I underestimated her skill for reinvention. Instead of accepting legal reality, she began turning the neighborhood against me with careful social tactics. Within 48 hours, she visited nearly every home, coffee and cookies in hand, spinning a story that cast me as an outsider, threatening their way of life. Her whisper campaign was elegantly simple. She painted herself as the protector of shared values against an absent owner abandoning responsibilities. She stressed my 3-year absence, questioned my commitment. "You know how much our kids enjoy the open spaces," she'd say. "We've worked hard to create something special." Her words were emotional, bypassing logic. I first noticed the change on a morning walk. Neighbors who used to wave now muttered questions. "You were gone for years, now you want control?" The social chill was no longer subtle. Mrs. Henderson, who had been skeptical of HOA overreach days before, snapped that outsiders shouldn't dictate neighborhood standards. The pressure cut deep, making me doubt myself even though I knew the law was on my side. She called an emergency neighborhood safety meeting at the clubhouse, framed around security and land values, but designed to isolate me. Invitations went to every mailbox but mine. The language sounded neutral, but the intent was obvious. Riley read the agenda and warned me. "She's casting you as a land rights extremist threatening recreation and harmony," she said. "She's making it collective interest versus individual selfishness instead of legal ownership versus unlawful seizure." It was a brilliant, cynical strategy, turning policy compliance into social pathology. The clubhouse was packed when I arrived, uninvited but unashamed. She'd arranged chairs in rows, standing at the podium like a teacher. She presented visuals of the Heritage Trail Project, family photos on public paths, charts of property values. The presentation was polished, crafted to make opposition look antisocial. Her opening remarks framed the issue with surgical precision. "For 15 years, we've built something beautiful together. Our children have grown up on these trails. We've gathered for shared events. Now everything we've created is at risk, not just improvements, but our whole way of cooperating. If you didn't know the truth." Her sincerity was convincing. Tom Bradley, a local contractor, shifted uncomfortably midway through. She snapped at him. "Remember our agreement, Tom?" The room thickened with his silence. I slowly took out my phone, recording quietly. Tom's hands trembled as he admitted she'd pressured him last fall to fabricate paperwork to prove trail usage. He hesitated again, stammering, but she cut him off sharply. "Do you want work here again, Tom? Do you want your contracts approved?" She barked, her tone revealing more than she meant. The coercion hung in the air. Several neighbors gasped. Tom finally nodded toward me. "I kept the messages because I knew something was wrong," he whispered. I held up my phone, the red recording light glowing. Her unguarded words filled the room like thunder. Doubt turned into undeniable evidence. The neighborhood dynamic cracked, but not completely. Sarah Mills described pressure to sign petitions. Another neighbor shouted that public trails mattered more than old deeds. Mike Foster recalled tax threats, but others still muttered about stability under her leadership. Arguments erupted, not opposition, but confusion. What once looked like unity now revealed itself as division. Her grip hadn't disappeared. It had fractured. Riley gave legal context, but stopped short of calling it victory. "If verified, these claims show serious manipulation," she said. "Threats over licenses or taxes cross regulatory lines but need confirmation." The caution left tension hanging. The HOA president folded her arms, forcing a thin smile, daring us to act. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. Louise Harper, who had sat silently for most of the meeting, finally spoke with moral weight. "I've lived here 40 years, longer than anyone. This was always Carter family land. Everyone knew it when they bought. These disputes aren't about shared benefit versus individual rights. They're about seizing private property through manufactured policies and social pressure." The HOA president's last attempt at narrative control faltered. Standing at the podium, her professional polish cracked as she pleaded, "We've worked too hard to let technicalities destroy what we've built. Our children deserve these spaces. Our land values depend on our shared amenities." Her words swayed some, but the room was split. Some residents no longer saw her as a protector. Others still defended her, muttering that I threatened their way of life. Her plan to isolate me had instead fractured the valley. Riley's closing remarks were calm, reminding everyone that cooperation depends on lawful compliance. But she stressed that tonight was only the beginning of the truth. The room buzzed louder than before, arguments sparking like brush fire. Some whispered about protecting families. Others demanded accountability. Instead of unity, there was turmoil, a clash of loyalty and doubt shattering her illusion of order. The atmosphere thickened. Neighbors eyed each other, unsure who to trust. She stood rigid at the podium, smile frozen, eyes darting as she counted allies. She stepped down deliberately, flanked by a loyal knot of supporters. The tension trailed after her as people left. I felt the hostility pressing closer, not from everyone, but enough to tighten my chest. She hadn't been defeated. She'd only shifted the battlefield. She left with her cluster, eyes locked on me. 3 days later, neighbors received official-looking notices in sealed envelopes. No return address, just intimidating codes. The language dripped with accusations. Selfish obstruction, damages exceeding $50,000. The delivery was timed for maximum fear. Every house got the letters the same morning, panic spreading like fire. Phones rang as people compared mailings, fear multiplying with each story. Mrs. Henderson sobbed, terrified she might lose her retirement over words she barely understood. Tom Bradley clutched his copy, stunned by fake contractor penalties linked to agreements he'd never signed. It was a precise, cruel scare tactic, but she had overplayed her hand. Instead of folding, I drew on my inspector background to investigate Valley Collective News. The first red flag was its slick website, polished but empty. Stock photos boilerplate lifted from unrelated sites. The listed address traced to a Nevada mail drop with no real office. Calls reached only endless loops promising subscriptions that never came. The deeper I dug, the clearer the deception became. Search engines revealed identical smear articles in HOA disputes across 6 states, same structure, different names. Valley Collective News was a content mill, churning out alarming stories without real journalism. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidence. Riley confirmed it with sharp precision. The articles weren't news, they were pre-written pressure templates designed to scare homeowners into compliance without any factual basis. Valley Collective News was a media factory producing scripted smears with no ethics. She highlighted recycled phrases used case after case, proof of templated misconduct masquerading as journalism. The implications were staggering. Riley filed a formal complaint with the state bar, since Davidson appeared to be practicing law without proper licensing across multiple states. The grievance triggered automatic inquiries and possible criminal charges for illegal legal services. Her nuclear option had backfired, exposing her to massive liability. I called an emergency neighborhood meeting, determined to turn fear into understanding. Riley explained how content mills exploit fear to force compliance with fabricated accusations. She broke down our articles line by line, revealing impressive language, hiding an absence of facts. Relief slowly shifted to anger as neighbors realized they'd been deliberately exploited. We uncovered her hidden incentive. Valley Collective News earned referral fees from HOA disputes, pocketing a cut from every smear campaign. Worse, she had arranged personal kickbacks, profiting each time she escalated the coercion. It wasn't about shared welfare. It was about money. Every article, every paycheck tied to fear, not honesty. The discovery changed everything. Fear turned to outrage as residents recognized the scam. Tom Bradley rose, pale but steady, admitting sleepless nights over phantom penalties. He held up his letter. "This is exactly the coercion she pushed me to legitimize with fake records," he declared. Murmurs grew into anger, the room uniting against her tactics. Sarah Mills shared her experience. "She told me my taxes would go up if I didn't support her development plans. Now I see she was using fake threats just like these letters. This is systematic deception aimed at residents who don't understand these systems. From shared realization came solidarity. Instead of isolating residents with legal fear, her campaign united them to share information and legal costs. We built networks to document future pressure attempts, creating collective resistance to predatory tactics. The state bar's probe widened as other victims surfaced across multiple states where Davidson had run the same scheme. Investigators mapped a nationwide scam preying on HOAs, her referrals just one branch. Federal authorities stepped in, elevating the case from local dispute to national criminal matter. Her desperation showed as her legal strategy collapsed into criminal exposure. Noah Grant distanced himself from the threatening notices, claiming ignorance of her deal with Davidson. But his nervous disclaimers and document destruction hinted at his awareness of potential federal charges for mail fraud and illegal legal services. Professional fallout came quickly. Her real estate license went under review. Her Regional Planning Alliance membership was suspended. Business relationships built over 15 years began to unravel as her misconduct became clear. Riley's analysis sketched potential federal charges: mail fraud, conspiracy, illegal legal services, witness intimidation, interstate violations, serious penalties. What began as a land dispute had turned into a criminal case with possible prison time. But watching her legal facade crumble, I worried about her mental state. Someone who escalated from land claims to systematic coercion to fake legal threats showed a dangerous disregard for reality. Her rising desperation suggested even riskier moves rather than surrender. Protecting the neighborhood weighed on me. Her tactics targeted not just my property, but every resident's financial security and legal understanding. Defending my family's rights had become defending my neighbors from an ongoing criminal enterprise exploiting group trust. As the fraudulent notices were exposed and her professional network collapsed, I knew it wasn't over. Someone willing to run a system of neighborhood deception and fake legal threats wouldn't simply retreat. Her pattern of escalation pointed to even more desperate and potentially dangerous steps as her scheme faced total destruction. The HOA president's failed attempt at legal intimidation drove her into a far more calculated kind of deception, one that crossed the line from civil wrongdoing into a level of misconduct that could be prosecuted nationally. On Tuesday morning, 2 men in official-looking uniforms came to my door. They introduced themselves as representatives of the Regional Environmental Compliance Group and the Valley Fire Safety Authority. Their badges looked convincing, their clipboards were neatly arranged, and their language had the kind of bureaucratic precision that's meant to make ordinary people feel powerless. David Richardson unfurled detailed environmental impact reports, alleging that my property violated watershed protection standards. His colleague, Mark Sullivan, zeroed in on fire safety issues, presenting formal papers that cited supposed lapses in emergency access and vegetation management during my 3-year absence. The entire presentation was engineered to intimidate through procedural complexity, but my background as an inspector taught me how to tell the difference between real oversight and staged compliance theater. Authentic environmental inspectors follow clear guidelines, provide reference materials, and explain the appeals process. The inconsistencies in these men's presentation gave away their act. This was not true departmental authority. When I asked for copies of their IDs and direct contact information for their supervisors, they exchanged nervous looks. Real officials expect to be asked for documentation without hesitation. Their evasiveness confirmed what my instincts were already telling me: they weren't legitimate. Riley arrived mid-review after spotting their official vehicle. She suspected another escalation in the HOA president's campaign and came prepared as my attorney. Her pointed questions about jurisdiction, procedure, and appeals exposed holes in the men's story. Their answers grew vague as her inquiries revealed how little they actually knew about proper institutional structures. That evening, I went through trusted databases to research both organizations. Neither Regional Environmental Compliance Group nor Valley Fire Safety Authority appeared in any state or national agency registry. Their supposed oversight responsibilities actually belonged to completely different institutions with different names, structures, and legal authority. When I called the real county environmental and fire departments, staff confirmed no inspections, citations, or emergency access concerns had been recorded. The entire review had been fabricated as part of the HOA president's escalating misconduct. Louise Harper's archival documents sealed the truth. County Fire Department maps from 1963 showed the natural access route through my land designated as the valley's official evacuation path. Blocking it would violate real emergency planning, not support it. Authentic watershed studies confirmed the same. Natural drainage patterns supported the original parcel boundaries established by the National Land Grant. Any development altering those flows would require comprehensive impact studies under real regulations, studies the HOA president had never obtained or even attempted to initiate. County Fire Inspector Torres validated the historic escape route during an emergency site visit, noting it had saved the entire valley during wildfire. Any structure obstructing it would demand serious review before permits could be granted. In reality, my family's long-standing use of the property enhanced fire safety, not threatened it. Research into her fabricated oversight network revealed a coordinated deception spanning multiple states and dozens of HOA communities. These fake agencies created professional-looking credentials, produced pseudo-scientific reports, and cited compliance violations to intimidate residents resisting HOA expansion. In return, the operation collected large percentages from neighborhoods coerced into paying fees or approving projects. The interstate nature of the scheme attracted national investigators examining widespread impersonation and mail fraud. Pretending to be regulatory officials is a serious federal crime, especially across jurisdictions for personal gain. Her escalation had dramatically increased her criminal exposure. Even after they left my porch, the image of those counterfeit uniforms stayed with me. The crisp creases, the hollow authority in their scripted warnings, the chilling silence between questions. Every detail was designed to destabilize me, to make me doubt my own standing on land my family had owned for generations. I couldn't help wondering how many others had folded under the same performance, signing papers or paying fees just to make the fear disappear. The violation was more than legal. It was deeply human. Neighbors soon realized the full scope of the false campaign. Sarah Mills discovered the environmental concerns that had worried her for months were fabricated. Tom Bradley learned that the licensing citations he feared were completely invented. National investigators grew increasingly alarmed as reports from other counties revealed identical misconduct. The pattern was unmistakable. Fake oversight threats tied to questionable HOA projects, always generating new fees for local operatives. Riley's review confirmed the HOA president had moved from property disputes into criminally prosecutable territory, impersonating officials, committing mail fraud, conspiring to deceive, and misusing interstate systems. The phony inspection was her boldest and most reckless move yet, proving she was willing to forge entire institutions to advance her real estate agenda. Anyone willing to fabricate entire agencies for control had abandoned all civic duty and legal accountability. As authorities dug deeper into the impersonation scheme, I realized her reach extended far beyond our community. She had been building this operation long before I returned, systematically constructing fake regulatory frameworks. Defending my family's rights had become part of exposing a national scheme targeting public safety and exploiting legal ignorance. And I suspected her desperation would grow as investigators closed in, making the next phase the most dangerous. Her fake oversight inspection demanded a definitive public response. My background as a national inspector gave me exactly the methodology required. I planned a comprehensive watershed analysis using biodegradable dye tracers to make the natural boundaries from the original 1812 federal land grant visible. This test would provide undeniable proof that historical surveyors relied on enduring ecological features, not arbitrary human markings, to define property lines. It required meticulous planning and community participation to ensure credibility. I invited county engineers, concerned neighbors, environmental consultants, and Riley as legal observer. The goal was a verifiable public demonstration rooted in environmental science and legal precedent, evidence, so clear even the HOA president's most sophisticated manipulation couldn't distort it. I knew visual proof carries persuasive power beyond paperwork. People believe what they see. Louise Harper supplied original fire department schematics from the 1963 wildfire. These aging maps showed the valley's natural water flows, mirroring the descriptions in the National Land Surveys. They proved that long before roads and fences, the valley was shaped by its topography, its ridges, runoff paths, and drainage lines. The test exceeded every expectation. Multiple biodegradable dyes, blue, red, green, were poured at precise elevations. Each color traced its own runoff path, perfectly aligning with boundary descriptions in federal records. The visuals were stunning. Vivid lines carving across the land, revealing property divisions older than any house, zoning permit, or paved road. The demonstration didn't just confirm geography, it awakened something older and truer. County officials documented everything. Drones hovered overhead to record the flows. GPS-tagged photos captured major convergence points. The scientific results matched the historic legal descriptions without deviation. The untouched terrain had preserved those borders for generations. She arrived uninvited midway through, heels crunching on gravel, her expression tight. Clearly she had hoped to undermine the method or discredit the results in front of officials. But as she tried to question the dyes and the runoff, her ignorance of even basic hydrology showed. She confused soil permeability with infrastructure and couldn't cite a single accurate environmental regulation. Her practiced authority cracked under pressure, revealing someone who had leaned on power. Not expertise, she questioned the dyes, the slopes, even the legitimacy of runoff itself, while standing ankle-deep in evidence to the contrary. County officials quietly took notes while residents exchanged glances. She had come to discredit me, but instead exposed her own incompetence. Riley then delivered a calm but forceful legal explanation. Natural boundaries predating formal construction, once reaffirmed by environmental testing, hold substantial weight in court. This isn't just symbolic, she said. It's legal reinforcement of land divisions grounded in science, not paperwork alone. Her words transformed the event from spectacle to precedent. Residents paralyzed by conflicting documents and HOA propaganda now felt empowered by the clarity of what they had witnessed. So the land itself tells us where the lines are, someone said aloud, as if recognizing it for the first time. What had seemed like abstract legal confusion became visible and almost beautiful, colored water flowing under sunlight. Soon after, county planning departments issued advisories. Any future development crossing these runoff lines would require environmental assessments under both state and federal law. Not only had the HOA president failed to do this, she hadn't even started the applications her paper empire built on. Intimidation and unchecked authority was collapsing under the weight of real science. But the most powerful moment came when Fire Inspector Torres spoke. He reminded everyone how these drainage paths had saved lives during the wildfire, and how interrupting them could be deadly. These aren't just water channels, he said. They're emergency corridors. Nature designed them. We learned not to fight that. The group fell silent, shaken by the idea of safety systems being endangered for personal gain. For me, it was emotional closure. Watching the dyes flow into place felt like seeing my ancestors' work restored. This land wasn't just mine. It was part of a system sustained by respect and unspoken continuity. My role was not just ownership, it was stewardship. Her illusion of control shattered. Residents, once deferential to her, began asking hard questions. How had she approved developments? Under what authority? Why had she never mentioned these environmental consequences? The silence around her grew. Even her closest allies hesitated before speaking. Some lowered their eyes. Others quietly stepped back. Louise's records confirmed that environmental flow had always guided policy, from emergency exits to drainage infrastructure to firebreak zoning. The patterns weren't new. We'd simply forgotten them. Combined with the modern test, her documentation revealed a truth hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to show it. The community's understanding shifted permanently. What once seemed like a legal fight now felt like a preservation effort. Protecting boundaries was no longer about paperwork, but about safeguarding systems older and wiser than us, systems that had kept the valley livable and safe. The HOA president's standing collapsed. The woman once praised as a visionary planner was now exposed as someone who had gambled the valley's safety for her own ambitions. Her credibility, built over a decade, crumbled in one afternoon of runoff and revelation. Her power had always relied on confusion. Now there was clarity, and clarity brought resistance. The national legal implications were huge. Her fraudulent oversight claims were now proven both factually false and environmentally dangerous. Impersonating regulatory bodies was one crime. Manipulating communities into undermining ecological safeguards added another layer entirely. Riley captured it perfectly. This wasn't just lying, she said. It was weaponizing ignorance. And when it comes to the environment, that can't be allowed to stand. Her voice carried across the silent group. Not just a warning, but a line drawn. As the dyes faded and the crowd dispersed, I watched the HOA president retreat. She was no longer defiant, just cornered, yet I couldn't shake my unease. Someone who had moved from civil misconduct to impersonation to denying visible science might still have one last move, something rash, something destructive. Her desperation was visible now, and desperation rarely leaves quietly. If there's one truth I've come to recognize, it's this: the people most eager to redraw boundaries are often the least willing to admit when they've finally been cornered. Karen's public embarrassment during the watershed demonstration sent her spiraling into desperation. Within a single day of the scientific evidence being made official, she launched a reckless, scorched earth effort to wipe out records before federal investigators could complete their case. But panic rarely breeds precision. Instead of covering her tracks, her interference only created new liabilities and exposed the depth of her deception. The first crack showed itself at 3 a.m., when motion-activated cameras caught her and Noah dismantling heritage trail displays under the cover of night. They moved frantically, ripping down signs, boxing up exhibits, erasing traces of unapproved construction. But the entire act was preserved in crystal-clear video, footage that would later prove central in court. Even their hushed conversations were recorded, Noah voicing doubts while Karen snapped at him to stay focused. The panic was unmistakable. By sunrise, her campaign had shifted to digital sabotage. She tried wiping HOA fee records, project schematics, and fabricated correspondence with phantom oversight boards. Ironically, her furious keystrokes left behind forensic fingerprints, proof not only that the files existed, but that she had intentionally tampered with them. Investigators restored nearly all of the erased data within hours, complete with metadata revealing exactly when and where deletions occurred. That same morning, intimidation began. Residents who had testified suddenly received suspicious phone calls. Tom Bradley was offered cash to amend his statement about forged documents. Sarah Mills was promised an HOA refund if she stopped cooperating. But every conversation was recorded. Neighbors had learned their lesson and kept thorough records. Some even baited her into incriminating herself. Knowing authorities were listening, her boldest blunder came when she confronted Louise Harper, the very resident whose historical archives had exposed the land manipulation. Karen arrived with Noah, demanding the return of old fire maps and threatening to challenge Louise's property rights if she didn't back down. But Louise, unshaken by veiled threats, refused to engage and quietly handed over her door camera footage to investigators. Riley had anticipated exactly this kind of retaliation. Days earlier, he'd helped establish strict preservation protocols. Every file was duplicated and secured with proper legal backing. Each attempt to intimidate, erase, or bribe became another documented offense. Our legal team had even begun drafting class action protections, preparing for the broader fallout. The prosecutor quickly recognized the shift, from civil misconduct to deliberate obstruction. Charges were filed: witness tampering, evidence destruction, fraud by mail, and coordinated misinformation. The crimes had escalated into felonies with serious sentencing consequences. The courtroom would not be a place for bargaining. It would be a reckoning. Once the scheme's multi-state reach became undeniable, federal agencies stepped in. Karen's fabricated oversight web had touched more than 20 housing communities across a dozen states, siphoning over $800,000 in fraudulent gains. What started as a zoning dispute had exposed one of the most elaborate HOA scams in the country. A federal task force took over prosecution. Under pressure, Noah turned cooperative. He described the machinery of her operation: fake authority, collusion with unlicensed contractors, deliberate misinformation campaigns. He surrendered meeting notes, message logs, payment records, and even folders marked crisis protocols detailing how to silence dissent. Karen's professional empire crumbled overnight. Her real estate licenses were suspended. Development board memberships revoked. Consulting contracts dissolved as clients learned of her indictments. Credentials she once flaunted became evidence against her. Former colleagues scrambled to distance themselves. Analysis showed her scheme was not an isolated mistake, but a formula, a playbook for exploiting vulnerable homeowners through staged legality. Fear tactics and kickback profits, the emotional wreckage was severe. Retirees drained savings on fake improvements. Young families had mortgaged homes based on false development permits. A single mother broke down in a public hearing, explaining how fear had nearly forced her to sell her home. Each erased file, each manipulation, each lie became a new charge, stacking so high that a plea deal was inevitable. Her freedom now rested not on manipulation, but on cooperation. Yet even cooperation could not repair the betrayal neighbors felt. Longtime residents shared stories, realizing how many had been isolated or silenced by her disinformation. Trust itself had been weaponized, and healing would take time. Financial investigators traced her profits through shell corporations, trust funds, and luxury assets. Restitution orders followed. One prized cabin she had used to charm HOA officials was seized and auctioned. At her final public appearance, Karen didn't speak. She simply walked to the front of the clubhouse and tore her leather portfolio in half. No speeches, no bluster, just a hollow stare. Her authority hadn't been stripped. It had collapsed under its own lies. Law enforcement deemed it one of the most sophisticated HOA frauds ever uncovered. The fallout reshaped oversight policies and introduced new homeowner protections. Yet justice didn't instantly bring closure. The greater challenge was rebuilding trust, transparency, and safety in a community fractured by manipulation. The legal case advanced faster than expected. With evidence gathered across 12 states, federal prosecutors documented the network's scale. Louise Harper's preservation of historical land grant records sealed the legal precedent, confirming the Carter family's reserved rights over valley easements and ensuring national protection against similar schemes facing decades in federal prison. Karen accepted a plea agreement, 2 years of supervised probation, full restitution, and permanent disqualification from HOA or development roles. Noah, though spared the harshest penalties in exchange for testimony, still faced permanent bans from property management, mandatory ethics training, and civic service. The system made clear that even accomplices would be held accountable. Residents saw tangible relief. Illegally collected assessments were refunded with interest through liquidation of Karen's assets and frozen accounts. Her professional licenses were permanently revoked. Environmental safeguards were codified, turning the watershed into a conservation zone that barred unauthorized development forever. The resolution didn't just protect property rights. It balanced ecological stewardship with legitimate community use. Working with county planners, I helped establish weekend hiking routes that respected conservation limits while providing safe access. A restructured HOA adopted strict checks and balances, transparent finances, independent oversight, and legal review requirements to ensure residents could never be deceived so easily again. Healing required education. Meetings taught homeowners about their rights, limits of HOA authority, and how to recognize fraudulent claims. Empowerment became the best defense. This wasn't only about legal victory, it was about belonging, stewardship, and safeguarding both community trust and the environment. Our case became a national example. Breaking apart Karen's fraud ring prevented similar scams in dozens of other neighborhoods. Federal agencies now use the case for training. Scholars cite our reliance on environmental and historical evidence as a model for property law. For residents, resilience grew from shared lessons: question false authority, demand transparency, and stand united against manipulation. That journey closed symbolically on a crisp autumn morning. County officials, neighbors, and environmental advocates gathered by the original federal survey marker to unveil the Carter Basin Protected Watershed sign. History, justice, and conservation fused into a legacy meant to endure for generations. Louise Harper's presence reminded us that history itself had guided the resolution. Her preservation of old maps and railroad documents didn't just win the case, it connected 2 centuries of protective efforts. Riley's legal framework offered other municipalities a model for combating systemic fraud. Together, property law, environmental science, criminal prosecution, and civic education showed how communities could protect both individual rights and shared resources. The vindication proved something vital. Protecting personal property and collective interests can go hand in hand when laws are applied honestly and citizens stand informed. Our final gathering at the clubhouse bore no resemblance to Karen's staged meetings. Instead, it was built on open dialogue, informed decisions, and genuine respect. Neighbors spoke of hard lessons, personal growth, and renewed faith in proper governance. Standing beside that wooden watershed sign, autumn light streaming across the valley, I felt less triumphant than steady. Defending my family's land had become something larger, protecting trust, conserving the environment, and upholding justice. The sign itself, etched with federal symbols and fresh lettering, embodied continuity across generations. Real authority protects. It never exploits, and maybe that's the lesson. Power only matters when it shields what's worth preserving. If you've read this far, I'd love to know, What moment struck you most? If this story resonated, a quick word of encouragement or a click of thanks means more than you know. Until next time, guard your land, your voice, and your story. They are always worth defending.